"Will anyone even marry me?" I asked. She smiled softly and whispered, "Maybe me." I said it out loud because there was no one around to hear me. That was what I told myself afterward, standing there at the corner of the garden terrace with a cup of cooled station tea in my hands and the artificial stars turning their slow rotation overhead. I said it because the terrace was empty. I said it because the question had been building up behind my teeth for 3 hours, and the only dignified release was to speak it quietly into a space where no one would have to hear it and feel obligated to answer. I said it because I was 41 years old, a compact cartography technician on temporary assignment to Waystation Velanavar Secondary, and I had just spent 3 hours watching a formal transit bonding ceremony through a viewport window in which two people from separate planetary systems had decided they were worth something to each other in a way that was permanent and recorded. And I had gone home, if you could call a shared transit quarter home, and changed out of my dress uniform and come to the garden terrace, which was always empty at the 23rd hour, and I had asked the question to the artificial stars, "Will anyone even marry me?" The stars did not answer. Something behind me did. I need to tell you about the terrace first, because where you say a thing matters as much as the thing you say. Waystation Velanavar Secondary was a compact transit hub in the outer Velanavar corridor, not a large station, not a strategically important one, but a well-maintained rest stop between two more significant postings. It processed approximately 400 arrivals per day, most of them freight operators, survey teams, and the occasional diplomatic transit party. The commercial level had 8 food establishments and 3 general goods suppliers. The residential and rest level had 42 berths, a small medical annex, and a common room that smelled reliably of the cleaning compound the night staff used on the floors. The garden terrace was on the upper tier, accessed by a service stairwell that most residents didn't bother with because the lift was faster. It was technically a recreational space. The station records listed it as such, but in practice it was used by nobody, because the artificial gravity on the upper tier ran 0.3% lighter than the standard and the slight buoyancy unsettled people who noticed it, and because the garden itself was managed by an automated system that kept the low-grav plants healthy but did not prioritize the comfort of human visitors. The benches were narrow. The lighting was calibrated for photosynthesis, not for reading. There was a viewport panel in the outer wall that looked out on the drift lanes rather than the docking bays, so you watched cargo vessels moving in slow, deliberate arcs rather than the more active commerce of the main station face. I liked it for exactly these reasons. My name is Cale Dross. I have been a cartography technician with the Compact Survey Division for 17 years. I map things. Specifically, I map things that are already partially mapped but incorrectly, sector charts with outdated notation, survey data that was recorded under one administrative classification, and needs translation to another, geological reference files that predate the current grid standard and have to be manually reconciled. It is meticulous work and I am good at it, and it is not the kind of work that generates stories you can tell at dinner. There is no moment in cartography where the room falls silent. There is no before and after. There is only the chart, and the error and the correction, and the next chart. I have a small apartment on Compact Station 7 in the Kethorvin Secondary Corridor. I have a sister named Phoebe who lives on the 3rd moon and calls me on the 1st of every month to ask if I have eaten something that required cooking rather than rehydration. I have a library of physical survey manuals that takes up one full wall of the apartment and several smaller shelves that have been annexed into adjacent wall space in a manner that my last 3 supervisors have mentioned with polite professional concern. I have not had a serious relationship in 6 years, and the last one ended not because of any dramatic event, but because the woman I was seeing was posted to Velthareth, and I was posted to Station 7, and the distance was managed for 14 months before we both agreed, in a call that lasted 22 minutes and was entirely civil, that the management had become the relationship, and the relationship itself had gone elsewhere. I had not thought about marriage seriously in several years. I had thought about it in the abstract, the way you think about things you are not sure you deserve, not resentfully, just honestly. I was 41. I was the sort of man people described as steady and reliable, and the sort of man who was not frequently described by other words. I was medium height, gray at the temples, with hands that had spent 17 years holding data styluses and were accordingly not interesting to look at. I was not loud. I was not adventurous. I was not the kind of person who changed the direction of a room when he entered it. I had spent 3 hours watching people who were. The ceremony had been in the main reception hall, 2 levels down. A compact researcher and a Velanavar 4th-tier noble, a bonding that had apparently been in negotiation for 2 years and had landed at Velanavar Secondary, because it was equidistant between their respective postings and neither family wanted to concede home territory for the ceremony. I was not invited. I watched through the viewport on the mezzanine level above, which gave a clear view of the whole floor and the entire proceedings, because the glass was transparent from one side only during ceremonies, and because I had come to use the station's reference terminal at the mezzanine level for the past 4 days, and had not known a ceremony was scheduled. And by the time I understood what I was watching, I had been there for 40 minutes and leaving felt stranger than staying. I watched the 2 of them stand at the center of the hall. I watched the people who had come for them take up the positions the protocol required. I watched the recognition forms exchanged and the compact record opened, and both names entered simultaneously by separate record officers, and I watched the woman reach across and touch the man's wrist. Not a gesture that was in any ceremony text I had ever read, just a thing she did because she chose to. And I watched his face do something very quiet in the moment after. I had gone to the garden terrace because it was the most reliably empty space on the station. It was not empty. She was sitting on the far bench, the narrow one beside the viewport, with her legs crossed at the ankle and a small document reader open in her lap. She was not looking at the reader when I came in. She was looking at the drift lanes through the viewport, where 2 cargo vessels were running parallel lines half a kilometer apart in the same slow outer corridor arc that the lane guides required. She had gray skin, the soft silver gray of a Velsoran noble line, not the cool industrial gray of the station walls, but something warmer than that, something that caught the photosynthesis light from above and gave it back at a slightly different temperature. Her hair was dark and long, pulled back loosely in the way you pull your hair back when you are not in a public context, the kind of arrangement that is not for anyone's benefit, including your own. There were copper filaments woven through the dark, not decoration. They were fine and structural, and they moved slightly when she turned her head. Her eyes were pale green, not striking, not theatrical, just pale and clear and focused on whatever the cargo vessels were doing. She was wearing plain transit clothes. No house insignia visible, no formal arrangement, nothing that announced anything. I had been speaking to what I believed was an empty room. It had not been empty. I stood at the entrance to the terrace, still holding my cooled tea, and experienced the specific quality of embarrassment that belongs to a man who has said something out loud at the 23rd hour, that he has spent his entire adult life not saying in rooms with other people. She had turned when I came through the door. She was looking at me now. I should say something about this. Not something profound. I want to be accurate about what this actually was. She had heard what I said. That was established. I had said something private in a space I had believed was empty, and she had been there, and there was no recovering the words or the context. What I needed to do was apologize for disturbing the terrace, explain that I would be leaving, and leave. I did not leave. I don't know exactly why. There was something in the way she was looking at me that was not embarrassment on my behalf and was not pity, and those are the two things you brace for when you have accidentally said something honest in front of another person. What it was, I think, was recognition, not of me, not personally, but of the category of the thing. She recognized a question asked to an empty room that had come out with more weight than it was supposed to carry. She looked at me for 3 seconds, then she looked back at the viewport. "I often come here because it's quiet," she said. Her voice was even and unhurried, the kind of voice that had learned not to create urgency where there was none. "I should have said something when you came in." "I should have checked," I said. "You assumed the terrace was empty because it usually is." She glanced at me again. Not at my face particularly, at the cup in my hand, which was the kind of generic compact station tea vessel that said nothing about the person holding it except that they were on a compact transit station. "I'm in the habit of sitting in the dark portion of rooms." I looked at the bench on my side of the terrace, and concluded, after a consideration that I hope appeared less deliberate than it was, that leaving would be more disruptive than staying. I sat down. We did not say anything for approximately 4 minutes. I drank my cold tea, which tasted like the mineral content of recycled water and a green plant that had not been consulted before being put into it. She read something on her document reader for a while, and then stopped reading and watched the cargo vessels instead. The artificial stars continued their slow rotation overhead. The photosynthesis light was amber at this hour, which was not actually intended for human rest but had the quality of it. "I should explain what that was," I said. "You don't need to." It was genuinely not meant for an audience. I understood that. A pause. The question wasn't rhetorical, though. I looked at her. She was still watching the viewport, not me, which meant I could look at her properly. There was something careful in her posture that was not stiffness, more the quality of a person who has learned to take up exactly as much space as they need and no more. "It wasn't," I agreed. "How long have you been asking it?" "I thought about that. A while," I said. I don't usually say it out loud. That was noticeable. I looked at my cup. "There was a bonding ceremony downstairs," I said. "I watched some of it through the mezzanine viewport. I wasn't trying to observe, I was at the reference terminal and I hadn't known it was scheduled." I paused. They looked like people who had decided something true. She said nothing for a moment. Then, "What does that look like?" Like they were worth something to each other in a way that didn't require explanation. I shook my head. "That sounds more philosophical than I meant it to." "No," she said. "I know what you mean." She closed the document reader and set it in her lap. "I watch ceremonies when I can. They're honest about what a relationship is trying to be." I looked at her. It was a strange thing to say. Not wrong, entirely true, actually, but unusual to say to a stranger on a garden terrace at the 23rd hour. "I'm Kale," I said. "Sarath," she said. She glanced at me then. Her eyes were pale green and very direct, and she was not looking at me the way people look at a person they are assessing for status or threat or utility. She was looking at me the way people look at a person they are deciding whether to continue speaking to honestly. "What do you do on the station?" she asked. "Cartography. I'm reconciling a set of pre-standard geological reference files for the Compact Survey Division. The assignment is about another 3 weeks." I hesitated. "I know that's not interesting." "You're correcting old errors in maps so that the people who use them in the future don't repeat those errors," she said. "I find that worthwhile." She tilted her head slightly. "What made you go to the mezzanine tonight?" "The reference terminal." "No, I mean, why did you stay to watch?" I considered how to answer that. I suppose because they looked like they were doing something real, and I was in the vicinity of it. She studied me. "And you wanted to be near something real?" "Yes." The word came out plainer than I'd intended, and I heard it land and I let it land. "Yes, that's accurate." She looked back at the viewport. We sat for a long time after that without speaking, but it was a different quality of silence than the first one. The first silence had been the silence of two strangers on adjacent furniture. This one had a different shape to it. I had said several true things to a stranger in the dark, and the stranger had not handled any of them incorrectly. I came to the terrace the next evening because I had told myself I was coming to use it the same way I had used it every night this posting, and not for any other reason. She was already there. She had a different document reader this time, larger, with what looked like administrative content rather than recreational reading. She was wearing the same transit clothes, or clothes that were functionally identical, and her hair was in the same loose arrangement. She looked up when I came through the door, and she did not appear surprised. "The tea here is not good," she said. "No," I agreed. "The evening service in the main dining hall has a grey root infusion that is significantly better. I've been having it there at the 21st hour the past several days." I parsed this. "Are you recommending I try it?" "I'm noting that it exists." She looked at her reader. "If you were there at the 21st hour, there would be no reason not to share a table." I stood at the entrance of the terrace for the second consecutive evening, looking at her. "All right," I said. We had the grey root infusion at the 21st hour for the next 6 evenings. I want to be careful about what I am describing, because I am not naturally given to overstating things. The dining hall at the 21st hour was nearly empty. The commercial cycle on Velanavar Secondary put the main meal hour at the 19th, and by the 21st there were usually 3 or 4 people scattered at different tables, people like us who were using the available quiet. We sat across from each other at a table near the east wall viewport, which looked out on the secondary docking approach rather than the drift lanes, and we talked. She did not tell me what she was. I did not ask. This is not an omission I was consciously making on my part. I simply had no reason to pry. She was a traveler between postings, apparently, on a transit stay of uncertain duration. She had the manner of a person who was accustomed to having structure around her that was now absent. She was precise about facts and careful with language, and genuinely curious about the things I said. She asked me about cartography. Specifically, and this is not something most people do, she asked about the errors. What kinds of errors accumulated in old charts, how they came to be, whether the person who made them had known they were wrong. "Usually not," I said, on the 3rd evening. "Most errors in old charts are honest. They come from the tools that were available or the grid standards that were in place when the chart was made. The person who recorded it was accurate to the information they had. It's just that the information was incomplete, or the standard has changed. So the error isn't the cartographer's fault." "Not usually." I drank the grey root infusion, which was in fact significantly better than the station tea. "Occasionally, there's an error of carelessness, something that would have been visible if more attention had been given at the time, but in my experience those are the minority. And you correct all of them the same way, regardless of origin." "Yes, the error is the error. It doesn't matter how it got there." I paused. "It matters that it's corrected now." She was quiet for a moment. "I think that's an ethical position," she said. "It's a procedural one. I don't think those are different things." I looked at her. The lighting in the dining hall at the 21st hour was warm and low, which was not the photosynthesis amber of the terrace, but something more ordinary, just the kind of light that made a room feel occupied rather than surveilled. She had her hands flat on the table, which I had noticed was a habit of hers at certain moments in the conversation, when she was thinking carefully. "What do you do?" I asked, "if you don't mind saying." "I'm between postings," she said. "I had a diplomatic secondment that concluded recently, and the next one doesn't begin for several weeks." "Is the transit stay at Velanavar scheduled, or just available?" "Available." She looked at her cup. "I chose it because it was quiet and because no one I know is here." I absorbed this. "Is that usually important to you, that no one you know is there. Sometimes, she said, when I need to be a person rather than a function. She looked up. You understand that? It was not a question. Yes, I said. She smiled. It was the first time I had seen her smile properly. The first time she had let something open rather than holding it in the precise arrangement she usually maintained. It was small and specific, and I found I wanted to behave in a way that would be worth it. You asked a question last night, she said, in the terrace. I had known this was coming eventually. I had been slightly waiting for it each evening, the way you wait for a thing when you know it is there. I said I know it wasn't rhetorical, she continued. But I want to be more specific. She looked at me steadily. Were you asking it because you believed the answer was no, or because you were uncertain and hoping to hear otherwise? The distinction was precise enough that it required actual thought. Uncertain, I said finally. I don't have a case against myself. I don't think I know what I am. I'm careful and quiet, and I correct errors in old charts, and I'm not good at declaring things, and I know that profile doesn't generate. I stopped, looked at my cup. I know that I am the kind of person who watches ceremonies through viewport windows. And you wanted to know if that was enough, she said. Yes. She looked at me for a long moment without moving or speaking, and I was careful not to look away. What would be enough, she asked. I don't know, I said. I think enough would be someone who didn't require me to be different than I am, who would find what I actually am worth something. She nodded slowly. Her hands were still flat on the table. I've watched you for 6 evenings, she said. Not intensively, just you arrive at the same time. You order the same drink. You consider what I say before you answer it. You told me last night that the view from the secondary docking approach is less visually interesting than the drift lanes but more accurate about the station's actual economic activity, and you said it because it was true and not because it was interesting. She paused. You came back to the terrace the second evening. I come to the terrace every evening. You came back knowing I might be there. I did not answer that immediately. You came back knowing I might be there, she said again quietly, and you sat down and you talked to me honestly, and you came to the dining hall when I said there was a grey root infusion, and you have said several true things in my presence that I do not think you say in the presence of most people. I looked at my cup. You are the kind of person who came to a garden terrace at the 23rd hour and said out loud what he was actually wondering, she said, and then stayed when the room turned out not to be empty. I looked up at her. That is not a small thing, she said. On the 7th evening, she told me who she was. Not because she decided to. I don't think it was a decision exactly. We were walking from the dining hall back through the common corridor that connected to both the residential level and the service stairwell to the terrace, and a page came through on her transit comm that used a form of address, 2 words, in the Velsorin High Register, that I recognized because I had been a compact cartography technician for 17 years and had reconciled several hundred Velsorin sector charts, and had read more administrative protocol texts than most people would voluntarily choose to. And the 2 words were a form of the Velsorin second-tier acknowledge presence address that was reserved for the use of persons of noble standing. She caught the change in my expression and looked at me. You understood that, she said. The form of address. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 3rd tier, my house is Velsorin Sarathoran, I'm Sarath Velsorin. I stood in the corridor and thought about what this meant to say or not say. Is that why you chose a station where no one you know is here? I asked. Partly. She looked at the corridor wall, which was the unremarkable composite paneling of a standard compact transit facility, and then looked back at me. I spend most of my time being the function. This posting was supposed to be the weeks when I got to be the person. I thought about what I had said on the 6th evening. Enough would be someone who finds what I actually am worth something. I've been talking to the person, I said. She looked at me. I don't know the function, I continued. I have no data on the function. I only know that you come to the terrace at the 23rd hour and sit in the dark portion and watch cargo vessels, and that you think cartography is an ethical practice, and that your Greyroot infusion is always gone before mine, and that you said several true things to me that I do not think you say in the presence of most people, either. She was still. I know that you knew what a person who has been watching a bonding ceremony through a viewport window was doing there, I said, and that you didn't make it worse than it was. She was quiet for a long time. You're not going to treat this differently now, she said. It was not a question. She was checking. No, I said. You're still Serath in a corridor at the 23rd hour with a transit comm that uses formal address forms. I paused. Which does explain why your transit style looks like someone who has been told how to pack light and has not entirely succeeded. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh fully, the first time she had let something out without managing it. It was quiet and real, and it lasted approximately 3 seconds, and I found I wanted to do whatever had caused it again. We were on the terrace on the 9th evening. The artificial stars were making their slow rotation. The photosynthesis amber was on. She had her legs pulled up onto the bench, the narrow one beside the viewport, in a way that was not dignified by any formal standard, and was entirely characteristic of how she occupied spaces when she was comfortable. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. In the Velsoran second form personal address, the one that carries acknowledgement rather than just identification, a speaker uses the named person's full given name and their own house name in a particular arrangement. She looked at the viewport. It means, I see you as a specific person. I know who you are. I am saying so in a form that will be true tomorrow. I waited. I have been thinking about whether to say it to you for 2 evenings. The terrace was very quiet. The cargo vessels in the drift lanes moved in their slow arcs. The form, she said carefully, is Velorath Shen Venkaildros Ta Velsoran Serath. I have registered you as a person whose name I will not put down. She paused. I want to say it in plain language because I think you deserve the plain version before the formal one. I looked at her. You asked, she said quietly, if anyone would marry you. I did not look away. She turned to look at me directly, the way she had on the terrace 9 evenings ago when she had first decided whether to speak honestly. Her pale green eyes were clear and careful and entirely present. I don't know the answer to that question yet, she said. The question is too new and we are too early, and I'm not saying this to answer it finally. She held my gaze. But I want you to know that I am the kind of person who could be that answer. I want you to know that what you are, quiet, careful, the kind who corrects old errors because it matters that they're corrected now, the kind who stays when the room is not empty. I want you to know that I have been watching that for 9 evenings and I find it worth a great deal. Her voice was very quiet. Maybe me, she said. I was aware of the terrace around us, the narrow bench, the viewport, the amber light from above, the cargo vessels in the drift lanes maintaining their parallel arcs. That's not nothing, I said. No, she said, it isn't. I looked at her for a long time. She looked back. She had not pressed her hands flat on the table. She was holding herself in that careful, precise way that was not distance but attention. The full present quality of a person who was paying attention to what was actually happening rather than to what they expected to happen. You said the Velsoran second form takes a particular arrangement, I said. Yes. Does it require the named person to respond formally? The corner of her mouth moved. No, she said. There is a traditional response form, but it is not required. The address stands on its own. What is the traditional response form? She was quiet for a moment. The named person says the speaker's name in the same arrangement. It means, I receive this. I stand as I am. I thought about that. Sarath Velsoren, I said. I receive this, I stand as I am. She looked at me. Something in her expression moved, not dramatically, not theatrically, but the way a person's face moves when they have been holding a thing carefully for a long time, and the holding becomes something else. In 63 days, she said quietly, my next posting begins at Velanavar Primary. It is a 2-year diplomatic secondment. Velanavar Primary is 4 hours from the station, I said. Yes. My assignment here ends in 3 weeks, but the Survey Division's reference repository for the Velanavar Corridor sector is housed at Primary. I know, she said. She did not look away. I looked that up. I understood what she was telling me. I should go back to Station 7 for the interval, I said. My sister calls on the 1st of each month. There are some reference files on my wall that would benefit from my attention. Of course, she said. And then I should come to Velanavar Primary with the Velanavar sector corrections. The repository there has the pre-standard records, and the reconciliation will take several months. She nodded once, the slight forward inclination that was the Velsoren acknowledgement gesture. Then I should make arrangements accordingly, I said. Yes, she said. And between now and 3 weeks from today, there is still the 21st hour. There is, she said. And the Greyroot infusion. And the Greyroot infusion. We sat on the terrace for a long time after that, side by side on adjacent benches, looking at the viewport where the cargo vessels moved in their slow parallel arcs. The artificial stars completed one full rotation. The photosynthesis amber dimmed to its night cycle and was replaced by a cooler register that was still adequate light for 2 people sitting in a garden at the end of a long day being honest with each other. I want to tell you something, she said again after a while. All right. You asked because you were uncertain and hoping to hear otherwise. She was looking at the stars. I want you to know that what you said out loud in the empty room was the right question. Not because of what I said in response to it, because the question itself was true and you said it. She turned to look at me. People who say true things are worth finding. I looked at her. I was not looking for that tonight, she said. I was looking for a quiet garden in the dark where no one I know is here. She paused. I am very glad you came in. I looked at my hands, the cartographer's hands, the gray-templed careful hands that had spent 17 years on data styluses, that were not interesting to look at and were entirely themselves. I'm glad you were already there, I said. On the morning of the 22nd day, I filed my completed reconciliation package for the Velanavar Corridor, pre-standard geological reference files, with the Compact Survey Division's administrative office at Station 7. The filing included corrections to 412 discrete notational errors, 2 grid standard translation errors that had propagated through 6 subsequent chart generations, and 1 complete resectoring of a subcorridor that had been listed under an administrative classification that no longer corresponded to any active compact designation. The reply from the division came the same afternoon. Confirmation of receipt, a note that the reconciliation would be reviewed by the senior archivist at Velanavar Primary, and a standard inquiry as to whether I was available for extended assignment in the region. I replied that I was. My sister called on the 1st of the month and asked if I had eaten something that required cooking. I had Greyroot infusion at the 21st hour for 11 consecutive evenings, I said. That's a beverage, Kale. It was made from actual roots, I said. That involves extraction and preparation. She was quiet for a moment. You sound different. I'm the same. You sound like someone who has said something honest and been met well. I thought about a terrace at the 23rd hour and artificial stars, and the way a person looks when they decide to keep speaking honestly. Yes, I said, that's accurate. 6 weeks later, I arrived at Velanavar Primary with my reference collection in a transit case, a data stylus that was down to its last calibrated week, and a file of sector corrections that the primary repository's senior archivist reviewed for 4 days before sending me a note that said, in its entirety, "The scope here is significant. Your station assignment is approved for 12 months, extendable." The diplomatic secondment had begun the week prior. I found the station's common terrace on the second day, not because I was looking for it, but because I was looking for a quiet space at a late hour, and the service stairwell led me somewhere with ambient photosynthesis lighting, and a narrow bench beside a viewport and artificial stars completing a slow rotation overhead. She was there. She was sitting on the bench that I recognized as hers, the dark portion, the one beside the viewport, with a document reader open in her lap and her hair in its loose, unhurried arrangement. And she was looking at the drift lanes through the outer panel, where a small freight vessel was making its patient, unhurried way toward the secondary docking approach. She looked up when I came in. She did not look surprised. "The Greyroot infusion here," she said, "is better than at secondary." "I'll take your word for it," I said. I sat down on the bench across from her, not the dark portion, but the one with the better angle on the viewport, and I looked at the freight vessel making its deliberate way across the drift, and I thought about charts and errors and the specific kind of work that consists of finding what is wrong and correcting it carefully, so that the people who come after you do not have to carry the same inaccuracy forward. Beside the viewport, she had gone back to her reading. The artificial stars completed their rotation. The lights were amber. Outside, the station did its patient, ordinary work. And there is a thing I have not told you yet, which is that on the evening of the 18th day at Velanavar Secondary, before I packed and before I made my arrangements, Sareth and I walked the full perimeter of the station's residential level, because the evening cycle had been extended by 40 minutes due to a docking bay calibration, and there was nothing that required us to be anywhere. It is a long walk. Velanavar Secondary's residential level is a ring, and the ring takes approximately 32 minutes to complete at an ordinary pace, and we completed it in 48 because neither of us was in a hurry. She told me about the first diplomatic posting she had taken. She had been 26, and it was a resource allocation secondment in the outer Velsoran corridor, and she had spent 11 months learning that the function of a diplomatic representative was to say precisely the right thing at exactly the right moment, and she had become good at it. And she had come home after 11 months and sat in her room for 2 days in a row without speaking to anyone, because she had been saying precisely the right thing for 11 months, and she was not sure she remembered what the imprecise version sounded like. "Did you recover it?" I asked. "Slowly," she said. "It helped to be around people who were not in the habit of listening for the right version. My younger brother, he is 16 years younger than me, which means he was a child when I came back from that posting, and children don't listen for the right version, they just listen." She paused. He asked me what I had actually thought about the resource allocation, not what I'd recommended, what I'd actually thought. "What had you actually thought?" "That the system was correct in principle, but that the principle had been applied without consideration of the local population's relationship to the resource in question." She said it precisely, which was the habit. Then she said, "I thought it was unjust, and I thought I was partly responsible for it remaining so." I looked at her in the corridor. "Did you say that to anyone official?" "Eventually," she said. "It took 6 months." She looked ahead. "I'm better at saying it now." We walked another half-turn of the ring before I said anything. "You came to a quiet station between postings where no one you know is here," I said, "because you needed to say the imprecise version for a while." "Yes." And then someone came into the terrace at the 23rd hour and said something entirely imprecise. She laughed, the real one, the short one, the one that lasted 3 seconds. Yes. I'm glad you stayed to hear it, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you stayed when the room wasn't empty. We completed the ring and came back to the junction where the residential level met the service stairwell, and we stood there for a moment in the intersection of two corridors, with the station's ordinary ambient hum around us. 12 months, she said. Extendable, I said. Yes. I thought about charts. I thought about the specific patient work of finding what was wrong and correcting it carefully, not dramatically, not in a single transformation, but consistently and correctly until the thing was right. I thought about how most errors are honest ones. They come from the tools that were available or the standards that were in place at the time, and how the error is still the error regardless of origin, and how the correction is always the correct move. I'll bring a new stylus, I said. Mine is down to its last week. I'll have the infusion ready at the 21st hour. That seems reasonable, I said. She looked at me one more time in the corridor before she went back to the residential wing, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything that was imprecise. We had already said those things. They were in the record. I walked back to my transit quarter. I packed my reference files. I made my arrangements. I called my sister on the 1st of the month. You sound different, she said. I said something true in an empty room, I said. It turned out not to be empty. Phoebe was quiet for 2 seconds. Kale. I know. Is she, is it? I don't know yet, I said. It's early, we are too early. I paused. But I know the question has an answer. I know that the answer is real and that it is in the direction I am going. I heard my sister make a sound that was not precisely a word, but which I understood. I haven't eaten anything that required cooking, I said. I'm working on it. Kale, she said again. I know, I said. I looked at my wall of reference manuals. I thought about Velanavar Primary and a repository of pre-standard charts and a 12-month assignment that was extendable. I thought about the 21st hour and grey root infusion, and a narrow bench beside a viewport in a garden where the artificial stars made their slow rotation. I thought about a woman who sat in the dark portion of rooms and who had said, maybe me. I thought that was, by any map standard, a coordinate worth going toward. I put the last reference file in my transit case, closed the latches, and began the arrangements for the morning. And I want to go back and tell you about the second evening, the one I glossed over by saying only that I came to the terrace and she was already there. That's accurate but incomplete. What happened on the second evening was that I spent most of the day at the reference terminal on the mezzanine level, which was its own small room off the main corridor with 4 workstations, and on most days, only 1 or 2 other people at any given hour. I had been at the same workstation for 3 days. I had a specific sector reconciliation underway, the Velanavar subcorridor J4 through J7, which had been surveyed under the old grid standard, and had acquired 3 successive layers of notation errors, because each subsequent compact survey team had worked from the previous team's corrections rather than the original data. The kind of problem I find genuinely interesting. The kind that requires you to look at where the error first appeared and trace every iteration of it forward, which is almost archaeological in its structure. I was at this work when the woman at the workstation 2 spaces down said, to no one in particular, the ventilation in this room runs at the wrong rate. It should be cycling faster. I looked up. She had a standard compact administrative workstation, not a reference terminal for cartography work, but one of the general access points that the station provided for travelers who needed to file documents or access the compact network. She was in transit clothes. She had a document reader open beside the workstation. She was looking at the ventilation panel on the east wall. How do you know the rate? I said. She glanced at me. The hum is in a lower register than standard. The blade pitch is wrong for this cubic volume. She paused. I notice things like that. I'll file a maintenance note, I said, because she was right and someone should, and there was a feedback form in the station's resident interface, and I had access to it. She looked at me. You would do that now. It takes 30 seconds. I filed the note. She watched me do it. Thank you, she said. The ventilation will run correctly by morning, I said. She nodded once and went back to her workstation. I went back to the J4J7 sub-corridor reconciliation. We worked in the same room for 2 more hours without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people doing separate things in the same space, with no obligation to address each other and no friction in the co-occupation. At the 19th hour she stood and gathered her things. The terrace at the 23rd hour, she said, not quite a question. Yes, I said. She left. I stayed for another 40 minutes finishing a section of the reconciliation. Then I went to the common dining hall for the main meal and ate something that did not require cooking and came with a sauce that was adequate, and I thought about the ventilation correction I had filed, and the woman who had noticed the rate was wrong. I did not know yet that she was a princess. I knew only that she noticed things and said them plainly. I thought that was a quality worth encountering. At the 23rd hour I went to the terrace and she was already there in the dark portion beside the viewport, watching cargo vessels in the drift lanes. I came in. She did not look surprised. I sat down on the bench on the other side of the terrace. We did not speak for approximately 4 minutes. The artificial stars continued their rotation. Then I said, I should have checked if the room was occupied. And she said, you assumed it was empty because it usually is. And that was the second evening. The reason I am telling you this is that what I remember about those 19 days, more than the specific conversations, more than the walk around the ring or the 21st hour or the grey-root infusion, is the accumulation. The way a thing builds from small, accurate acts that have no separate significance, and then, viewed together, have an enormous significance that you couldn't have predicted from any individual one of them. I filed a maintenance note. I came back to the terrace. I drank the grey-root infusion. I answered her questions about cartography honestly. I said a true thing in a corridor at the 23rd hour. I said another true thing and then another. She noticed what I was doing and named it accurately. She said she had been watching for 9 evenings and found it worth a great deal. She said maybe me. I stood as I was. Here is what I have learned about maps. A map is always a simplification. The world it represents is more complex than the representation, and any map you make will have gaps, things it doesn't record, measurements it doesn't take, relationships between features it doesn't capture. This is not a failure of the map. This is the nature of what a map is. A map is not the world. It is a tool for navigating the world, and its value lies in whether it is accurate enough to be useful. The errors I spend my working days correcting are the errors that make a map less accurate than it should be. They are worth correcting because an inaccurate map is worse than no map. It gives you false confidence. It sends you toward coordinates that will not have what you expected at them. It fails the people who trust it. What Sarath said to me on the terrace, I receive this, I stand as I am, was the beginning of a map, not a complete one. We said as much, both of us. The question is too new, we are too early, I don't know yet. But the map was oriented correctly. The coordinate was real. The direction was the right direction. I have never in my professional life corrected an error dramatically. I have never made a chart right in a single stroke of recalibration. The work is slow and methodical, and it requires that you check what you've done, and then check it again, and then look at what remains to be done, and then keep going. I do this because it is the right practice, not because it is glamorous, because a chart is only valuable if it is honest, and an honest chart requires the work. I think the same is true of everything worth having. What happened then is this. I went to Velanavar Primary with a transit case and a new stylus and the completed reconciliation files, and a scheduled arrival that coincided, by no accident of timing, with the second week of a 2-year diplomatic secondment. I presented my work at the primary repository's intake desk at the 9th hour. The senior archivist, a compact seconded official named Preen Corval who had been at primary for 11 years and had an encyclopedic familiarity with the pre-standard sector records, reviewed the first 3 correction files and said, "This is good work." I said, "Thank you." He said, "You found the propagation error in J4 through J7. We've been aware of it for 6 years and no one wanted to take it on." I said, "It required tracing back to the original survey data. It's not quick." He said, "No." He looked at the rest of the filing queue. He said, 12 months extendable." I said, "I may need slightly more than 12 months. He said, "That can be arranged." I found the station's common terrace on the second day of the posting. It was on the upper service level, accessed by a stairwell that most residents didn't bother with low photosynthesis amber lighting and a narrow bench beside a viewport and artificial stars in slow rotation. She was there. I sat down across from her. "The grey-root infusion here," she said, "is better than at secondary." "You mentioned that," I said. She looked at me over the edge of her document reader. Her pale green eyes were clear and present and entirely themselves. "I looked up the repository assignment protocol," she said. "The pre-standard Velanavar sector reconciliation is listed as requiring substantial on-site presence. 14 months at minimum, more likely 18. That's a significant assignment." "It's important work," I said. "The charts have been inaccurate for 30 years. The people who use them deserve better." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said, "they do." Outside the viewport, the drift lanes were quiet at this hour. A single transport vessel was making its patient way toward the primary docking approach, running its ordinary lights in the ordinary dark, going where it was going without drama. "The 21st hour," she said. "The dining hall on the station has a grey-root infusion. I have had it once and it is worth returning to." "Then I'll be there," I said. She went back to her reading. I looked at the stars. The amber light from above was warm and low and sufficient. "And,"